Montana Territory, 1876. The dust of the trail still clung to Ethan Norwood's coat as he rode into the small settlement of Pine Creek. The late afternoon sun cast long shadows across the rutted Main Street, and the young cowboy adjusted his hat against the glare. At 25, Ethan had already seen enough of the West's harshness to believe one thing with absolute certainty. A man survived out here by looking after himself and no one else. His boss, Cattle Baron Walter Kincaid, had made it clear that collecting the $500 owed by the Sullivan family was non-negotiable. Either they paid or their small ranch would become Kincaid property by week's end. Ethan wasn't one to question orders. After all, sentiment was a luxury men like him couldn't afford in a land where winter could freeze you, summer could parch you, and outlaws could end you without warning. "Trust gets a man killed out here," Ethan muttered to his dun gelding as they approached the town's only saloon. "And caring about strangers is just another word for foolishness." The horse nickered softly, as if in disagreement, but Ethan paid it no mind. He'd learned early that attachment only led to pain. His own father had died defending their small Nebraska homestead when Ethan was just 12, leaving behind a widow who succumbed to grief and consumption barely a year later. Since then, he drifted from ranch to ranch, building a reputation as a skilled horseman and a man who followed through on his word, qualities that had earned him his current position as Kincaid's right-hand man. What he needed was enough money saved to buy his own spread someday, a place where he'd answer to no one. What he didn't need were complications or distractions. The saloon offered welcome respite from the trail. Ethan ordered whiskey, then inquired about the Sullivan place. "That be the widow Sullivan's spread 'bout 5 miles east," the barkeep informed him, polishing a glass with a questionable rag. "Her husband passed last winter. Pneumonia, they say." Ethan nodded, processing this information. Kincaid hadn't mentioned dealing with a widow. It changed nothing, of course. Business was business. "She's still running cattle out there?" he asked casually. The barkeep shrugged. "Trying to, got herself and that pretty daughter of hers doing the work of 3 men. Folks around here help when they can, but times are tight for everyone." "Daughter," Ethan's brow furrowed. "More complications. Jessie Sullivan, 21 years old and twice as stubborn as her daddy ever was." The barkeep chuckled. "Beautiful girl though, golden hair like summer wheat, blue eyes that'll make you forget your own name. Smart too, been running the books for that ranch since she was 16. Ethan drained his whiskey, annoyed at the unnecessary details. A debt was a debt, regardless of who owed it or what misfortunes had befallen them. He spent the night in the town's modest boarding house, rising with the dawn. Better to handle business early and be on his way. The spring morning was crisp as he rode out, following directions to the Sullivan Ranch. The property was modest but well-maintained, a testament to hard work rather than prosperity. A small herd of cattle grazed in the distance, and smoke rose from the chimney of the simple 2-story house. As Ethan approached, a figure emerged from the barn leading a chestnut mare. Even from a distance, he could tell it was a woman by the way her dress swayed around her ankles. She wore a practical blue work dress with the sleeves rolled up, and her golden blonde hair was tied back in a loose braid that caught the morning light. She spotted him and stopped, one hand shading her eyes against the rising sun. Something about her stance, confident, unafraid, made Ethan sit straighter in his saddle. "You're trespassing on private property," she called out when he was within earshot. Her voice carried clearly across the yard, firm but not hostile. Ethan reined in his horse about 10 feet from where she stood. Up close, he could see what the barkeep meant. Jessie Sullivan's face was striking, high cheekbones, determined chin, and eyes the color of a mountain lake. A smudge of dirt marked one cheek, and wisps of hair had escaped her braid to frame her face. She looked like someone unaccustomed to backing down. "Miss Sullivan?" he asked, removing his hat. "I'm Ethan Norwood, representing Walter Kincaid." Her expression instantly cooled. "Mr. Kincaid's man. I wondered when he'd send someone. I've come about the $500 your family borrowed last fall." "I know why you're here, Mr. Norwood." Jessie patted her horse's neck, though her eyes never left Ethan's face. "Would you like to come inside? My mother just made coffee." The invitation surprised him. He'd expected tears, pleading, or anger, not this composed hospitality. Cautiously, he dismounted and secured his horse to the hitching post. As he followed her toward the house, he noticed the mended fence, the well-tended garden, and the neatly stacked firewood. This wasn't a place being neglected by grief. The interior of the house was modest but clean, with simple furniture and homespun curtains. An older woman with the same golden hair as her daughter, now streaked with gray, stood at the stove. She turned when they entered, her face momentarily registering alarm before settling into a polite mask. "Mother, this is Mr. Norwood. He works for Mr. Kincaid," Jessie explained, her voice gentle but pointed. "I see, Mrs." Sullivan wiped her hands on her apron. "Will you take coffee, Mr. Norwood?" Again, Ethan found himself wrong-footed by their composure. "Yes, ma'am, thank you." They settled at the kitchen table, an awkward trio bound by an uncomfortable transaction. Ethan cleared his throat, determined to maintain his professional distance despite the warmth of the kitchen and the aroma of freshly baked bread. "Mr. Kincaid sent me to collect the loan made to your husband last September. $500 plus 50 in interest." Mrs. Sullivan's hands trembled slightly as she poured coffee, but Jessie's gaze remained steady. "We're aware of the debt, Mr. Norwood," Jessie said. "My father borrowed that money to buy breeding stock after we lost several head to mountain lions. He intended to repay it after spring calving." "But circumstances changed," Ethan stated flatly. "Yes," Mrs. Sullivan said softly. "Thomas caught pneumonia in January. By February he was gone." Ethan shifted uncomfortably. "I'm sorry for your loss, ma'am, but business." "Business is business," Jessie finished for him. "We understand that. We're not asking for charity, Mr. Norwood." "Then you have the money?" he asked, surprised. "Not yet," she admitted, "but we will by the end of the week." Ethan set down his coffee cup. "Miss Sullivan, I'm not here to make threats, but Mr. Kincaid was very clear. If payment isn't made by Friday, he intends to foreclose and add this land to his holdings." "We have cattle ready to sell," Jessie insisted. 15 head. The buyer arrives Thursday from Helena. "And if the buyer doesn't show, or offers less than you're expecting?" For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Jessie's face. "Then we'll figure something else out. This land has been in my family for 12 years. We won't lose it." Mrs. Sullivan reached across the table and covered her daughter's hand with her own. "Jessica has been managing everything since Thomas fell ill. She's done a remarkable job keeping us afloat." Something about their dignified determination in the face of adversity stirred an unfamiliar feeling in Ethan. These women weren't begging or making excuses. They were fighting to hold on to what was theirs with whatever tools they had available. "Mr. Kincaid instructed me to stay until the matter is resolved," Ethan found himself saying. "Perhaps I could look around the property while I'm here, assess its value." What he didn't say was that he wanted to see for himself if their claims about the cattle were legitimate or merely a delaying tactic. Jessie's eyes narrowed suspiciously. "You're welcome to look, Mr. Norwood, though I wonder if you're assessing for fair market value or for Mr. Kincaid's benefit." Her directness caught him off guard. Most people treaded carefully around Kincaid's men, aware of the cattle baron's influence throughout the territory. "I report what I see," he answered simply. "Fair enough." Jessie stood. "I need to mend the north fence line. You're welcome to accompany me if you'd like to see the property." Mrs. Sullivan looked concerned. "Jessica, perhaps Mr. Norwood would prefer to rest after his journey." "No, ma'am," Ethan said, rising from his chair. "I'd like to see the ranch." The morning passed with Ethan following Jessie around the property. She moved with the confidence of someone who knew every inch of the land intimately, pointing out improvements her father had made and changes she'd implemented since taking over operations. The herd, though small, looked healthy, and Ethan had to admit the 15 head she'd selected for sale were prime beef cattle that should indeed fetch a good price. What impressed him most, however, was Jessie herself. She handled tools with practiced ease, spoke knowledgeably about cattle breeding and grazing rotation, and displayed a sharp mind for the business side of ranching. When they stopped to repair a broken fence post, she drove nails with sure, strong strikes, needing no assistance. "You know your way around ranch work," Ethan observed as they paused to drink from canteens beneath the shade of a lone cottonwood. "Had no choice but to learn," she replied, wiping her brow. "My father believed a person should understand every aspect of their livelihood, regardless of whether they're a man or woman." "Not a common view." "No," she agreed with a small smile. "Pa was not a common man. He came west with nothing but determination and taught himself everything he needed to know. He always said the frontier doesn't care what's between your legs, only what's between your ears." Ethan nearly choked on his water at her blunt phrasing. When he recovered, he found her watching him with amusement. "Did I shock you, Mr. Norwood? I apologize. When you grow up on a ranch, you tend to speak plainly." "No apology needed," he managed, noticing how the sunlight brought out golden highlights in her hair. "And you can call me Ethan." Something shifted between them in that moment, a small crack in the formal barrier they'd maintained. "Well then, Ethan," she said, getting to her feet, "we should finish the fence before midday heat sets in." They worked side by side for another hour, falling into an efficient rhythm. When a sudden summer thunderstorm caught them far from the house, they took shelter in a small line shack. Rain drummed on the tin roof as they sat on opposite sides of the one-room structure, both acutely aware of their isolation. "Your employer, Mr. Kincaid," Jessie ventured after a silence, "is he a fair man?" Ethan considered the question. "He pays well and rewards loyalty. Fair depends on your definition." "And your definition?" He met her direct gaze. "I've learned not to judge the men who sign my pay vouchers. The West isn't built on fairness, Miss Sullivan. It's built on strength and opportunity." "Please call me Jessie," she countered, "and I disagree. The West was built by communities helping each other survive. My father used to say no ranch is an island." "Your father sounds like he was an idealist." "He was a realist who understood that no one survives out here alone." Thunder crashed overhead, emphasizing her words. "Even Mr. Kincaid, with all his wealth and power, depends on men like you to maintain his empire." Her insight unsettled him. "It's a fair exchange. He provides opportunity, I provide labor. And when he sends you to take a widow's ranch..." Ethan stiffened. "I'm collecting a legitimate debt, not stealing property." "I know," Jessie said more gently. "I didn't mean to imply otherwise, but surely you must sometimes question the tasks you're given." The question hit uncomfortably close to doubts Ethan had buried deep. He stood abruptly, moving to the door to check the weather. "Rain's letting up, we should head back." The remainder of the day passed in civil but reserved interaction. That evening, Mrs. Sullivan insisted Ethan stay for dinner rather than ride back to town in the muddy twilight. He accepted reluctantly, hyper-aware of the contradictions in his position, breaking bread with the very people whose livelihood he might soon help destroy. Over the next 3 days, Ethan found himself drawn deeper into the rhythms of the Sullivan Ranch. He told himself he was simply being thorough in his assessment, but truthfully, something about the place and its determined inhabitants had gotten under his skin. He helped with chores without being asked, rode the perimeter with Jessie to check for strays, and even assisted Mrs. Sullivan when a chicken coop collapsed under the weight of rainwater. Each evening, conversation around the dinner table flowed more easily. He learned how Thomas Sullivan had built the ranch from nothing, how Jessie had grown up learning both traditional women's work and ranching skills, how the small community of Pine Creek had rallied around the family during Thomas's illness. And each night, lying on the narrow cot in the small guest room, Ethan found himself increasingly troubled by his purpose there. The Sullivans weren't irresponsible debtors trying to evade their obligations. They were hardworking people who'd been dealt a difficult hand and were doing everything possible to honor their commitments. Most troubling of all were his growing feelings for Jessie. Her strength, intelligence, and occasional flashes of dry humor had begun to occupy his thoughts at inconvenient moments. He found himself watching her hands as she mended tack, noticing the grace with which she moved despite her practical clothing, admiring the determined set of her chin when she tackled difficult tasks. On Thursday morning, the day the cattle buyer was expected, Ethan woke early and found Jessie already in the barn, grooming the cattle for presentation. "You're up with the birds," she commented without looking up from her work. "Thought you might need help getting the herd ready," he replied, picking up a brush and moving to the next stall. She paused, studying him. "Why are you helping us, Ethan? You do realize that if we succeed, your boss doesn't get our land?" The question hung between them, demanding honesty. "I'm not sure," he admitted finally. "Maybe because it's the right thing to do." "The right thing," she repeated softly. "I thought the West wasn't built on right and wrong, just strength and opportunity." He met her gaze. "Maybe I'm reassessing some things." A smile transformed her face, warming something inside him. They worked in companionable silence until Mrs. Sullivan called them for breakfast. The morning passed in anxious preparation, with all three acutely aware that everything hinged on the buyer's arrival and offer. By noon there was still no sign of the cattle buyer. By 2 o'clock Jessie's composed facade began to show cracks. By 4, even Mrs. Sullivan's determined optimism had faded. "He's not coming, is he, Mrs. Sullivan?" finally said as they stood on the porch, watching the empty road. "There could be 100 reasons for the delay," Jessie insisted, though her voice lacked conviction. "A broken wagon wheel, bad weather further north." "Or he found a better deal elsewhere," Ethan suggested gently. Jessie's shoulders slumped momentarily before she squared them again. "Then we have until tomorrow to find another solution. I'll ride into town and see if anyone's heard news of other buyers in the area." "I'll go," Ethan offered. "I need to report to Mr. Kincaid anyway." The look Jessie gave him was complex, gratitude mingled with the realization that he was still, ultimately, Kincaid's man. The ride into Pine Creek gave Ethan time to think. By law and contract, Kincaid had every right to foreclose tomorrow. The Sullivans had failed to repay their loan on time, but the thought of being the instrument of their dispossession now filled Ethan with revulsion. The question was what he could do about it without violating his employment or his word. In town, he learned the cattle buyer had indeed been delayed by a washed-out bridge, but was expected to arrive the following afternoon, too late for the Sullivans under the current deadline. With a heavy heart, Ethan made his way to the telegraph office to send word to Kincaid. He was surprised to find a message waiting for him. "NORWOOD stop situation, changed stop, extend deadline 1 week stop, await further instructions stop KINCAID." The unexpected reprieve left Ethan both relieved and puzzled. Kincaid wasn't known for his flexibility or mercy. Something else must be at play. He sent confirmation of the received orders, then hurried back to the Sullivan ranch, eager to deliver the news. As he approached, he saw Jessie sitting alone on the porch steps, head in her hands, a posture of defeat he'd never witnessed from her before. She looked up at the sound of his horse, quickly composing herself, though her eyes were reddened. "Mr. Norwood," she greeted him formally, the recent warmth between them noticeably absent. "I trust you've informed your employer of our failure." Ethan dismounted and approached the porch. "The deadline has been extended 1 week." Her eyes widened in disbelief. Why?" "I don't know," he admitted, "but the cattle buyer is expected tomorrow afternoon. If his price is fair, you'll have the money in time." Jessie stood suddenly, impulsively throwing her arms around him in a brief, fierce embrace before stepping back, clearly embarrassed by her display of emotion. "Thank you," she said. "I know you must have advocated for us." "I didn't," he confessed. "The telegram was waiting when I arrived. This wasn't my doing." Her joy dimmed slightly. "I see. Well, it's still good news. Mother will be relieved." They stood awkwardly for a moment, the brief physical contact having disrupted their careful boundaries. Finally, Ethan spoke. "There's something else you should know. Kincaid isn't known for changing his mind or showing mercy. I'm concerned there's another motive at work." "What kind of motive?" I don't know, but I think you should be prepared for anything. The following day brought both triumph and turmoil. The cattle buyer arrived as promised and offered a fair price for the 15 head, $470. Not enough to cover the full debt with interest, but close. Jessie was elated until Ethan reminded her they were still $30 short. We can sell some of the furniture, Mrs. Sullivan suggested that evening. My grandmother's silver. No, Mother, Jessie interrupted firmly. We're not selling family heirlooms. I'll figure something out. Ethan remained silent, conflicted. He had $80 of his own money in his saddlebags, more than enough to cover the shortfall. But offering would cross a line he wasn't sure he should cross. The decision was taken from his hands the next morning when Walter Kincaid himself arrived at the Sullivan ranch, accompanied by 2 of his men. Ethan met them in the yard, surprised and unsettled by his employer's unexpected appearance. "Sir," he greeted Kincaid with a touch to his hat brim, "I didn't expect to see you here personally." Kincaid, a broad-shouldered man in his 50s with iron-gray hair and cold eyes, surveyed the property with the calculating gaze of someone mentally adding it to his holdings. "Norwood," he acknowledged, "thought I'd see this place for myself." "Where are the Sullivans?" "Inside, sir. They've raised most of the money. $470 from the cattle sale yesterday." Kincaid seemed unimpressed. "Still short, aren't they?" "A debt's not paid until it's paid in full." Before Ethan could respond, the front door opened and Jessie emerged, followed by her mother. Both women had dressed in their Sunday best, as if armor for the coming confrontation. Jessie's golden hair was neatly arranged in a braided crown, and she wore a simple but becoming blue dress that emphasized the color of her eyes. "Mr. Kincaid," she greeted him with dignity. "Welcome to our home." Kincaid removed his hat with unexpected courtesy. Mrs. Sullivan, I've come to discuss our business." "Of course, would you like to come inside?" "No need. I understand you've raised most of the money owed." Jessie nodded. $470. We're still working on the remainder." "I see." Kincaid paced a few steps, studying the property. "Tell me, Miss Sullivan, do you know why I agreed to lend your father money last fall?" The question seemed to catch Jessie off guard, because he offered fair interest in this property as collateral. Kincaid chuckled. "No, young lady. I lent him money because he was Thomas Sullivan, the most honest, hard-working man I ever had the privilege to know." Confusion crossed both Sullivan's faces. Ethan felt equally bewildered. "You knew my husband, Mrs. Sullivan asked hesitantly. "Indeed I did." Kincaid's typically harsh expression softened slightly. "We came west on the same wagon train in '58. He saved my life when our party was attacked near South Pass. Took an arrow meant for me." He pulled back his collar to reveal an old scar. "Thomas never mentioned it." Mrs. Sullivan shook her head. He rarely spoke of the journey west." Typical Thomas, never one to boast. Kincaid turned to Jessie. "When your father approached me for a loan last year, I recognized his name immediately. I've been watching this ranch from afar for years, impressed with what he built. The loan was my way of repaying an old debt." "I don't understand," Jessie said, glancing between Kincaid and Ethan. "If that's true, why did you send Mr. Norwood to collect so aggressively?" Kincaid fixed Ethan with a piercing look. "I sent Norwood to assess the situation, not to threaten foreclosure. Apparently, he took liberties with my instructions." The accusation struck Ethan like a physical blow. "Sir, your telegram specified." "We can discuss your interpretation of my orders later, Norwood." Kincaid cut him off sharply. Ethan fell silent, stunned by the betrayal. Kincaid was rewriting history, painting himself as a benevolent creditor and Ethan as an overzealous collector. But why? The answer came as Kincaid turned back to Jessie with an appraising look that made Ethan's stomach turn. "I have a proposition, Miss Sullivan," Kincaid said smoothly. "I'm willing to forgive the remaining $30 and extend the repayment period for the rest by 6 months, if you'll agree to have dinner with me in town tomorrow night." The request hung in the air, its implication clear. Ethan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. Mrs. Sullivan paled visibly, while Jessie's expression froze in carefully controlled neutrality. "That's very generous," Jessie finally said, her voice unnaturally even. "But I prefer to repay our debts in full, through conventional means." "Pride is an expensive luxury, Miss Sullivan," Kincaid replied, "especially for a woman trying to run a ranch alone." "She's not alone," Ethan found himself saying, stepping forward to stand beside Jessie. "And the Sullivan Ranch isn't for sale, not in whole or in part." Kincaid's eyes narrowed dangerously. "You forget yourself, Norwood, you work for me." "Not anymore." The words came easily, bringing with them an unexpected sense of liberation. "Consider this my resignation." "Ethan," Jessie whispered, clearly alarmed by his intervention. "You'd throw away your position for these people," Kincaid demanded. "Think carefully, boy. Cross me, and you'll not find work with any ranch in the territory." "Then I'll start my own," Ethan replied, reaching into his pocket and withdrawing his money. He counted out $30 and held it out. "This completes the Sullivan debt, $500 principal, 50 interest." Kincaid ignored the outstretched money. "This is a mistake you'll regret." "The only mistake was not seeing you for what you are sooner," Ethan replied steadily. "Thomas Sullivan might have saved your life, Mr. Kincaid, but it's clear you didn't learn much from his example." For a tense moment, it seemed Kincaid might order his men to intervene. Instead, he snatched the money from Ethan's hand and stuffed it into his vest pocket. "Debt paid in full," he said coldly. "You best hope our paths don't cross again, Norwood." With that, he turned and strode back to his horse, his men following. As the three riders disappeared down the road, a heavy silence fell over the yard. Ethan stood rigidly, the full impact of what he'd just done washing over him. He'd thrown away his position, likely his reputation, and possibly his future in the territory, all for a family he'd known less than a week. "You shouldn't have done that," Jessie said softly, breaking the silence. "Not for us." He turned to face her. "I didn't do it just for you, I did it because it was right." He paused, "and maybe a little for you." "Mrs." Sullivan touched his arm gently. "That money, it was your savings, wasn't it?" "Yes, ma'am," Ethan managed a smile. "But there's more where that came from. I'm pretty good with horses. Someone will hire me." "We will," Jessie said immediately. "We need help here, especially with the summer work coming up, if you're interested in staying." The offer hung between them, weighted with unspoken implications. Ethan studied her face, seeing hope, uncertainty, and something deeper that mirrored his own confused feelings. "I'd be honored," he replied simply. "But I don't want charity either." "It's not charity," Mrs. Sullivan assured him. "It's practical necessity, and after what you've done for us, it seems only fair to offer you a place." That night after Mrs. Sullivan had retired, Ethan and Jessie sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies rise from the grass. The events of the day had shifted something fundamental between them, breaking down the last barriers of caution. "I still can't believe you stood up to Kincaid like that," Jessie said, her shoulder warm against his in the cool evening air. "Neither can I," he admitted with a soft laugh. "I've spent years believing the only way to survive out here was to look after myself, keep my head down and follow orders. Then I met you." "Me?" "You and your mother, the way you fight for this place, for each other. The way you refuse to give up, even when everything seems stacked against you." He turned to face her more directly. "You made me question everything I thought I knew about what matters." In the dim light, he could see the flush rising in her cheeks. "I'm not sure we deserve such credit." "You do," he hesitated, then reached for her hand. "Jessie, I know we've only known each other a short time, but I've never felt like this before. Like maybe there's more to life than just surviving." She entwined her fingers with his. "Like maybe it's about living instead." "Exactly," his voice grew softer. "I came here to collect a debt, but found something I didn't even know I was looking for." "And what was that?" She whispered, her face tilted up toward his. "A reason to stop running, a place that feels like it could be home, and, you. The kiss that followed was gentle at first, then deepened with shared longing. When they finally drew apart, Jessie rested her forehead against his. "Stay," she murmured, "not just as a hired hand, stay and build something with us, with me." "I'm not a wealthy man," he cautioned. "What I gave to Kincaid was most of what I had." "I don't care about that, we'll build our wealth together day by day." Her eyes shone in the starlight. "My father always said the richest man isn't the one with the most land or cattle, but the one with the most love in his life." "Your father sounds wiser by the day," Ethan said with a smile, drawing her close again. The months that followed transformed both Ethan and the Sullivan ranch. With his knowledge of horses, they expanded into breeding and training, gradually building a reputation that brought buyers from as far as Denver. Mrs. Sullivan thrived with the reduced workload, and the ranch began to prosper under their combined efforts. Kincaid made good on his threat to blacken Ethan's name with other large ranchers, but the smaller operators and townspeople, many of whom had their own reasons to resent the cattle baron, rallied around the Sullivans and their new partner. By Christmas, the loan had been repaid in full with interest, officially ending any claim Kincaid might make on the property. On a crisp spring morning almost exactly a year after Ethan first rode onto the Sullivan ranch, he and Jessie stood beneath the old cottonwood tree where they had first begun to see each other as more than adversaries. Friends and neighbors gathered to witness as they exchanged vows, Mrs. Sullivan beaming proudly beside the local preacher. "I, Ethan Norwood, take you, Jessica Sullivan, to be my lawfully wedded wife," he said, his voice clear in the morning air. "I promise to build our life together with honesty, hard work, and love, the true wealth of the West." As they sealed their vows with a kiss, Ethan reflected on the strange journey that had brought him here. He had ridden into Pine Creek believing he understood how the world worked, that a man survived by keeping to himself and looking out for his own interests. Now he stood surrounded by community, holding the hand of a woman whose strength and determination had changed everything he thought he knew. The debt he'd been sent to collect had been paid in full, but the heart he'd found in the process, that was a treasure beyond price, one he intended to cherish for all the days of his life. That evening, as they sat on the porch of what was now their shared home, watching the sunset paint the Montana sky in shades of gold and crimson, Jessie rested her head against his shoulder. "Happy?" he asked, his arm around her waist. She smiled up at him. "Completely. You know, when you first rode up that day, I thought you were just another hired gun coming to take our home." "I was," he admitted. "Or at least I thought I was." "What changed?" Ethan considered the question, thinking of all the small moments that had shifted his perspective. Jessie driving nails with sure strikes, Mrs. Sullivan's quiet dignity, the way the community had rallied around them in their time of need. "I discovered that the things I thought would make me strong, independence, detachment, looking out for myself, were actually making me weaker," he said finally. "Real strength comes from connection, from having something and someone worth fighting for." Jessie squeezed his hand. "My father would have liked you. I wish I could have known him." "You do, in a way. Through this land, through the home he built." She gestured to the ranch spreading before them, peaceful in the gathering twilight, "and now it's ours to build upon together." As darkness fell and stars began to appear in the vast Montana sky, Ethan Norwood held his wife close, marveling at how a simple debt collection had led him to the richest life he could imagine. One measured not in dollars or acres, but in love, purpose, and belonging. He had indeed found his heart, and with it, a home.